convened for the ordinary council meeting. Thank you to all. We're now starting with the health and safety report. Nick, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much and good afternoon. So the main report in your pack covers a number of topics. I'll just go through a few of those briefly. So the report includes a brief summary related to our COVID response. To be honest, not a lot has changed over the last month. We've got an ongoing focus on reporting and really working safely within those guidelines that the organisation has developed to work within the government's framework. There is a review of that framework due to be announced today, actually, so we'll keep an eye on what comes out of that, if anything, and obviously make sure we remain aligned to its settings. In terms of staff infection rates, as at about 9 a.m. this morning, we've had 156 staff to date test positive for COVID-19. That date commences right back to January 2022, so over the year to date. We saw the biggest numbers really in March, so we have a peak that dates back to March. In April, May and June, the numbers have been more moderate. So in May, for example, we had 31 staff report positive for COVID-19. We are seeing sickness absenteeism at a higher rate alongside the COVID numbers that we've had, probably the highest we've had for the last couple of years, which is not particularly surprising. We know that the last 2 years were quite impacted by both the borders being closed and COVID restrictions in general. And in fact, the numbers we're seeing this year are similar to what we saw back in 2019. And we do see the seasonal peak during the winter months also. The report covers also our work around risk reviews. We've just completed during May a review of the helicopter risk that was undertaken by staff in SPI and ICM with our health and safety team supporting. And those reviews are really designed to check the controls we have in place and make sure they are aligned to good practice guidelines, in this case, the aviation requirements. ELT are also due to receive a report on the psychological harm bow tie during July. And that'll be quite an important report to receive and will guide some of our work around wellness and mental health in the workplace for the foreseeable future. The reporting of incidents and near misses continues to be a focus. We've run a campaign which council are aware of to increase our reporting after some concern that numbers had dropped off. And the focus has really been to recognise the importance of those reports, particularly around near miss reporting to avoid incidents that could cause harm to people. We've seen some increased reporting since. We're still trying to build those numbers. What we are seeing is some of the reports being reclassified as well. So some of the reporting coming in as a near miss is actually being recategorised as an incident. So the numbers have been, I guess, reviewed and assessed as we go. In terms of the positive performance indicators, the health and safety team is still working through assessments to the agreed schedule to monitor the health and safety management system in action. Dave earlier today talked to the new flip charts that have been updated and released into the organisation. Really simple devices, but really important to allow staff to respond quickly to the various emergencies that could eventuate. Finally, from me today, we haven't had a safety alert issued in May, but you might be aware of an accident, a fatality near our offices in recent days for a cyclist commuting into work. We are going to do some work around cycle safety as a consequence of that and reiterate some of the steps people can take to reduce that risk. And obviously it's a tragic event to have happened in a street that is very close to our building and facilities. But on that note, I'll pause.
Thank you. Thank you, Nick. Questions or comments, please? Councillor Nicol.
Yeah, on the last item you raised there, I mean, a young person lost their life literally on the street right behind us on the corner of London Street. And the next day there was an accident. They ended up going to the hospital at one of the roundabouts to the left of the street. And I'm just mindful that we made the choice to come into the central city and we're encouraging people to walk, bike, bus into work. And so I'm just left wondering and asking what else we can do to help put some pressure on Hamilton City Council, who also then put pressure on Waka Kotahi to get some funding and to really speed up some of those connected corridors. It's just it seems like something that we can acknowledge and react to, because this could have easily been one of our staff, and under 30 as well there. So yeah, just really keen to see whether anyone else has some thoughts on that, and whether there's more we could do other than just the education that we can put forward, which I think is a great step. Thanks.
Thank you for that. Councillor Husband?
Yeah, I was just wondering, and probably to the cyclists as well, do you think, and it's a genuine question, it's not a smart ass question, you know how we've made the roads narrower by putting in all these yellow lines and places where you can't park your cars anymore? Do you think that's made it worse or better? Worse, yeah. Yeah, no, but I'm really interested. I don't put pressure on Hamilton, but I'll be interested to know, because in in Morrisville, they've done that, and they did it for a little while, and it created mayhem with the cyclists. So I wonder if it makes it better or worse. Because it doesn't give any room to move as a cyclist if something does go wrong.
Good work for you and your new job.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I just interested, yeah.
Yeah, Fred?
Yeah, I support where you're coming from entirely, and I think we do need to be having real dedicated cycle lanes to this facility. There's too many staff here at risk. And I mean, even if it requires, like we do in Raglan, that we share footpaths, and that's an acceptable thing, that cyclists and pedestrians know that they're sharing footpaths. It doesn't mean the bikes have got any more right than foot traffic, but it's safer. I nearly took out a cyclist here the same day. Stopped at a roundabout because the traffic was heavy. Cars came in behind me. A cyclist that I didn't realise was overtaking on the inside, and I was making the very next left-hand turn. It wasn't until, of course, I almost clipped him with my rear view mirror as I was turning that way, because he was in a blind spot, couldn't see him. And I veered and carried on around the roundabout and did a full lap. But honestly, these roundabouts and cyclists, I can't see how you can be on a bike and complete that manoeuvre safely. It's dangerous as hell.
Thank you.
Yeah, so
Councillor Nick?
the question before as well. We're in a time where we're in a culture where we have designed cities in particular to have cars take the precedence. So yet it is public space that people by human right should be able to walk on quite safely, and some choose to cycle. And I want to make the distinction, obviously, that it's a territorial authority topic, very much so, and it gets debated in other spaces. But it's one where it's really unfortunate, because we're sending a whole lot of messages that this is the right way to go about your life, to take the congestions out, which makes it nicer for all the other road users. But there are decisions that can get made around reallocating road space, and around whether you put up the little sticks or whether you paint some green boxes like we have here on Ward Street at the start. That intersection has none of those things. And there are some more permanent ways you can do it as well. And I'm mindful there's that whole conversation that will then be going on at Hamilton City Council, but they are hamstrung also by Waka Kotahi not having more money in the funding bucket, which many around this table know very well. But there are generally, when something happens, there are interim controls put in place. And so I'd just be really keen for us as a council to urge for that, to help our staff, not be a repeat of that. If in any way it could be helpful. And also, obviously, any time that we are advocating to Waka Kotahi as well. So
That's right.
It's just a point to be made.
Thank you.
And leave it to them. But we have opinions to them all the time. This is another one we can have an opinion on. Thank
Can
you.
I float something just because I've got the chair? My thoughts are, I do cycle from time to time and I experience a number of the challenges. And one of the things that to me is the best game changer is not so much painting the roads and making allowances. It's actually about visibility to drivers. So I'm mindful that when we moved here, we had a program that went for a year that gave a half subsidy for people to travel by public transport. What I'm thinking of is that why can't we offer as a council to any staff who are riding a bike a one-off small fee that pays for either a very high vis vest or one of those they're now quite intense flashing red lights, and they also have a white light for the front. So basically recognising that our staff are vulnerable and offering that as an opportunity, because it makes the difference. If you can see the bike, you're not likely to hit it. So that's just a thing I'd like to, maybe you could comment on that, Nick?
Yeah, I think that's a suggestion we can certainly investigate and follow up. I think it's a very constructive approach.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, just wanted to support Jen. I support what you're saying, Barry, too, but I think we should do a little bit of work on it, but to decide how best to do that. Yeah. And to you, there's no doubt those cycle lanes, such as what they've done out here, make a massive difference. So that does come up a point in what's the Hamilton East Bridge called? That one there's got a really narrow one, and it's almost too narrow. It's a bit freaky, but I mean, hey, this stuff's not reinventing the wheel. It's all been done in Europe for years, so there's plenty of work to work on. Yeah.
That's the last point on the culture, if that's right, as well. When we give that training, there's a lot of discussion around how cyclists can keep themselves safe, but I'd really like to flip that more onto how the people that are driving the big piece of ton steel are taking care not to hit things like other people that are on the road. Yeah, so if the training could be also for how to drive better rather than how to keep yourself safe as a cyclist, those are two distinct things. And they'll all help with the culture shift in our minds as to what our spaces are for everyone. Thanks.
Councillor Teague.
Yeah, thanks. I think you make some good points, Chair, about those personal safety issues. But for me, the key is, and further to Fred's point, we need separated cycleways. So there's a physical barrier between the car and the cyclist, and frankly, those plastic things sticking up just don't cut it. And that can be like a sort of a concrete curve that makes that separation, or a completely separate lane. And that's what's happening in Europe, and it's happened there for decades. In fact, in Paris, when they made this move after COVID, or since COVID, the number of people cycling has increased exponentially because people feel safe to be able to go out and do it. So that's the key. We need to actually physically separate the two modes of transport.
Thank you. Hugh.
Mr. Chairman, I think we should show leadership, and therefore I'd be prepared to move that Waikato Regional Council bans all motor vehicles from every road over which we control.
Have you got a seconder, councillor?
That would help with the road toll too.
I think that fails for want of a seconder. So we'll let one out. So Stu Husband.
Yeah, just wondering, just back to you, Stu, that 30 km or that 30 km/h speed limit drop that they've done around town in Hamilton, taking that one aside as a tragedy, but do you think that'd help as well? And the speeds lower around the cities?
Oh, well, yeah, I mean, it's logical. It's going to, yeah.
Has it helped?
Oh, well, I don't know because I don't bike enough in the city, but one thing I will say, if it was your kids riding their bikes to school, your attitude would be very different, and we all suffer from this to just some general cyclist, and so that's fundamentally what it comes to. Look, I don't know, you have to ask us.
Fair question. So So what you're hearing is that there's a range of issues. We've got infrastructure issues. We've got a personal things that can be done personally. My comment was the infrastructure issues do take time. So what I'm thinking about health and safety, we need to move quite quickly in respect of, the fact that accidents are happening. So we need to be thinking about things we can do, and it includes councillors, that we can do for our staff and councillors to make them more high visibility. And I think that's a thing we could do quite quickly, and then have the staff consider that. Thank you, Nick. Is there any other comments before we move on?
Can I just make a quick
comment? Yep, a comment there.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to let you know that some of the transport staff have heard this conversation, so comments that you've made have been picked up. And as we speak, the director of that team is talking to Waikato District at the moment about our business improvement review, which of course addresses a lot of these things about trying to get infrastructure and operations tied in one with PT, but also looking at the mode shifts that we're trying to achieve and regional rating as well.
Thank you, Chair. CEO. Quick comment. Yep.
I ride a bike 6 days a week. High vis, flashing lights front, flashing light back. Got taken out by a car doing 20 k's, fractured my leg. No road markings in Te Awamutu in the area concerned. So your synthesis is right, and I think we should say to staff, if you ride to work and you come to work without high vis gear, then that's not reducing the chance of you being taken out. And I would support your moot that we subsidise or buy or whatever tail flashing lights, front flashing lights. These new high power LED lights are not cheap, but I would support you in buying that safety equipment or getting a discount rate on safety equipment for people to be even a bit more safer.
Thank you. Thank you for that, and thank you for the discussion. No other comments on the report. So up the top there goes a bike. Thank you for that. So I have a mover for this report, please. Yes, moved by Councillor McPherson, second by Councillor Nicol. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, carried. Okay, now to Marley, who will present on the order of candidate names on voting documents. And hopefully this will not be a half hour or hour long meeting. It only needs to be 5 to 10 minutes. Marley.
Ka pai, 5 to 10 minutes. Right, starting from now. Tēnā koe Chair, councillors, tēnā koutou. With our nomination period about to start in 2 weeks, we've certainly experienced an increase of the number of conversations we are now having about elections. And this report today is another. The purpose is to present you with information so that you can decide on the order of candidate names that will appear on voting documents. And so the options available are alphabetical, pseudo-random, or fully random. And just to give you a bit more insight into what's been done previously and elsewhere, you will see in the report that previous decisions of council from 2013 was pseudo-random order, and then for the most recent 2 elections, council has determined that fully random is the most preferred for this council. Other councils or territorial authorities within the Waikato Regional Council Rohe have all made decisions in regard to what they will do this time round. And you'll see from the report that random is by far the most preferred option, followed then by alphabetical. And the same is the case right across the motu when you look at what all councils have decided to do. With respect, though, to the candidate profile book, it's important to emphasise that regardless of the option you choose for the order of candidate names on voting documents, The order within the profile booklet will be alphabetical. All cost options for the three are the same. And one further piece of information within the report is based on research that has been undertaken by Auckland Council, who have found that Auckland voter behaviour indicates that whilst the order of candidate names alphabetically might have a small impact, the evidence did not support an argument that alphabetical order of candidate names results in unfair advantage to those who appear on a voting document at the top. So those are the key points that are outlined within the report, and so over to council to make the decision.
Right. I'll move, just to get the motion ahead, I'll move that random be seconded by Councillor Nicol. Yep. Any comment or question before we put it? How about that? This would be the record time, I believe, the council has ever done this. I'll put that. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, carried. That's me.
Thank you.
Councillor Nicol. Thank you. We now move on to page 113, which is the setting of rates. Janine, I don't think you can match that last one in terms of time. Should be straightforward because there should be no surprises in this, really, the way we've been reporting it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Nothing like a challenge to see how fast we can get some resolutions through. In terms of the report that's in front of you, my recommendation would be to take the report as a whole. Effectively, these are the resolutions required to be set by council to set rates for the coming financial year in accordance with the annual plan that you adopted last week.
Right, short and sweet. Moved by Councillor Verco, seconded by Councillor Litchwick. There being no red lights there, you've almost broken the record for that one too. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, carried. Thank you, staff. Well done. And now we move to page 137. We're cranking. Andrew Wilson. We're now moving into public transport. It's always been a matter of great discussion. It makes up 40% of our expenditure, but we've spoken about it many times, so let's see how we go. Andrew.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much, members. So we have in front of us hoping to get a decision from you today to approve the draft regional public transport plan proceeding to public consultation. So I have a short presentation to go through to brief you on the process we've got to get to the draft, but also the headlines in terms of what's in the draft and what we'll be consulting on as well. Am I able to move the slides or do I need to? Brilliant. So the draft regional public transport plans, the development's been overseen by the Regional Connections Committee, and the Connections Committee's been very disciplined in making sure that process has been collaborative across all district council partners. So very much a regional approach to developing the plan. So RCC is made up of representatives from this council, of course, but district councils, Waka Kotahi Disability Advisor, among other stakeholders like Kiwi Rail as well. So the draft plan is very much orientated around climate change, reducing emissions, enabling freedom to access opportunities without a car, which sort of touches on some of the conversation you were having a little bit earlier. If we jump to the next slide, please. So the direction we had from the Regional Connections Committee was really, really clear. So responding to climate change, reducing emissions must be a headline, not a footnote. So we've taken that really seriously. Being ambitious with PT improvement aspirations, and the context for that was this plan should be aspirational, and other processes like LTPs, business improvement review projects, things like that will determine what's affordable and when. So permission for this plan to be very aspirational. And as I mentioned, ensuring a region-wide focus. So we've had a number of workshops with RCC, broader input via the regional RTC, joint approach with the Metro Spatial Plan, very, very closely aligned with that project. Members will be familiar with that. So this plan is actually publicly consulting on elements of that MSP project itself. So we're hoping today to get approval from council to move to public consultation. With that, we'll have stakeholder visits to all our district council partners. We'll have some webinars available to the public among other initiatives. So public consultation in July, aiming for hearings in August. And again, the hearings committee will be made up of members from this council, but also representatives from our district council partners as well. So final amendments following the hearings and aiming to have the plan adopted by this council in September. If we jump to the next slide. So the headlines. So as I mentioned, the really clear direction from RCC was around emissions. And when you think about public transport, there's two ways we can tackle emissions. One is in the form of how we deliver our PT services, so the types of vehicles we use, whether they're zero emission or not. But the other really big one is driving modal shift. So less use of private motor vehicles, more use of public transport, walking, cycling. So the plan in particular really hones in on these two things. And is very ambitious. So in terms of how we deliver our services and reducing emissions, the plan is proposing to become carbon negative for the period 2027 through to 2050. So carbon negative means we would be sequestering or consuming more carbon than what we produce through the delivery of our services. So that's specifically relating to our vehicles and all the activities associated with delivering public transport services. So a very ambitious goal there, and I'll provide a brief overview of some concepts around how we could achieve that. And then a really significant focus is on what are the network service levels on a region-wide scale that's capable of delivering modal shift over time. If we jump to the next one. So a carbon negative pathway. So we can break that down into some really simple steps. So the first step is just properly accounting for the emissions from our vehicles, trains, public transport operations. We know that we're on a pathway to transitioning to zero emission vehicles. The writing's on the wall for diesel powered buses. At the moment, we really don't have a choice anymore, and that's a good thing. The most cost efficient solution for us is zero emission battery electric vehicles in particular. So even when we transition the majority of our fleet to zero emission vehicles, and the bulk of that can happen from 2027 onwards, just the way our service contracts fall, we will still have an amount of unavoidable emissions. So the concept of this bit in the plan is to offset that to a point where we can be actually carbon negative, so better than carbon neutral. We've done some costings for what that might cost, and it comes out at about less than 3% of total PT expenditure per annum to get to a carbon negative state. So step 4 is really the maintaining a level of offsetting to really lock in that carbon negative component. We can move to the next slide. So when we start talking about PT, the PT plan outlines network improvement aspirations for the region as a whole, and that can be broken down into particular service layers. So interregional services, for example, the passenger rail service, but more broader than that is one layer. Regional services, connections within and between our urban areas within the Waikato region, and then the metro urban services, so where most of our population is concentrated in and around Hamilton, different services and way of delivering services there. I'll very briefly give you the headline for each of those service layers and then sum up, and that will be the briefing. If we jump to the next slide, please. So interregional passenger rail. The plan has outlines the priorities for improving Te Huia, among other things. The content of the plan has been to the Te Huia subcommittee, which has endorsed the draft wording within the plan. But in essence, it's a prioritising staged improvements over time to Te Huia, flagging the investigation of the viability of additional stations in North Waikato, so Tikawhara, Pokeno, for example, among many other things. If we jump to the next slide. So this is a significant one, but not the most expensive one. So regional PT aspirations, inherent in the plan is a notion of connecting every urban area to its nearest regional centre, so providing a baseline of accessibility for all our communities. And then in addition to that, enabling some transport options within urban areas, so a truly region-wide focus to providing services. I'm moving quite quickly, but we can come back and ask questions as we go. There's only a couple of slides to go, so if we jump to the next one, please. So the metro area. So metro area, I mean Hamilton and the townships immediately around Hamilton. There's about 300,000 people in that location now, and population, it's one of the fastest growing locations in New Zealand. You know all of this. It's also one of the most car dependent. So there's been a really significant work program underway in partnership with the City Council and others, being the Metro Spatial Plan, which has been endorsed by the Future Proof Implementation Committee and this council as well. So the plan really picks up on those components and is quite explicit about what a network structure, PT network structure, service levels look like over the next 15 to 20 years for Hamilton, sufficient to transformational in terms of how it might influence how our urban areas evolve within that area over time. But at its heart is a network capable of offering people freedom to access opportunities, whatever those opportunities might be, anywhere within our urban areas without a car. If we jump to the next slide. So within that, if we were to implement all of those aspirations, we can sum that up into a cost estimate over time. So many of these things are quite significant, so it's a 30-year implementation sort of horizon. What it means in terms of expenditure on public transport is an increase from about 36 million per annum, which is roughly what we're spending now, to about 140 million per annum over a 30-year period. So bearing in mind that population is forecast to increase over that time, to help put that into context, we allocated into a per capita expenditure rate. So that means a per capita increase of about, it's spending about $71 per person in the Waikato per year now, to about $225 per person in the Waikato. And to help put that into context, on the right-hand side is some per capita expenditure rates for regions elsewhere in the region. So even if we lift it up to that level, we're still going to be nowhere near the top in terms of expenditure on public transport generally. So hopefully that helps put things into context. A big part of all of this as well is related to our PT Business Improvement Review, which Mark Tamura's out engaging with Waikato District Council at the moment on. So that recognises that to deliver on many of these aspirations, we need to be configured differently. So at the moment, our funding model for public transport is too complex. It's really difficult to get an integrated program coordinated and delivered across the number of TAs we have, the number of different road controlling authorities we have. So at the heart of the PT Business Improvement Review is a goal to simplify all of that as well. And then I think it's the last slide. It's the next one. Thank you, Dave. So next steps would be consulting on the plan in July. As I mentioned, stakeholder visits, public hearings, an opportunity for this council to make final amendments, and then all going well, the plan being formally adopted September this year.
Thank you. Now, councillors, if you look on your page 140, you'll see item 18, which says a summary proposal document is currently being prepared by the communication team, which will be tabled at council meeting. It's actually on your tables now. It looks like this. So that's the particular document relative to this discussion. Questions, I have first, and comment, Jennifer. Councillor Nicol.
Oh, thank you. And thank you, Andrew, for all your work on it, and for the Regional Connections Committee and others involved for their work on it. It's been really appreciated to be able to come along to some of the workshops. Really looking forward to the public getting to have their say if people are supportive of today's motion on what they think. Putting my climate action hat on, I'm just stoked that it's really awesome, because just to remind people, the emissions in the Waikato, the second highest category is transport. It's 16% of our pie chart. It went up 32%. Emissions went up 32% in that category over 3 years previous. So it's the one that's going in the wrong direction. And so when you've got IPCC scientists saying emissions need to start dropping by 2025, you've got a target that we've set as a region of what we're going to achieve by 2030. It's the category where we know what needs to happen to shift things in the right direction. And I think this plan really, really helps do that. There are definitely still parts of the plan where I would do things differently, but it's going to be cool to have the community have their say. Like, for example, I really love the access to opportunity language that I've only just recently come across when I was watching a webinar by Jarrett Walker. It's just the idea that the public transport allows you to access things, and really plays into that thinking that has been big on my mind as well, with the cost of living everyone's dealing with, that owning and fueling your car is a massive cost in our budgets, right after rent, somewhere near food probably as well. And so the ability to, at the very least in a city, which is obviously where my other hat and representation is for Hamilton, to not have to own a car because you've got a kick-ass public transport system, and the potential of that through plans like this is really, really cool. So yeah, and on top of that, we were talking before about safety. I mean, to get more people onto public transport not only makes people that still are in cars have a much better experience, having less drivers in their private vehicles also increases that safety aspect for the other road users. So thought I'd sneak that in. But yeah, I'm really happy to second this if someone else was happy to move it as well. Thank you.
Councillor Story.
Thank you, Andrew, for your report. Appreciate the level of detail that you've gone into. Just a couple of questions that really center around this this goal of net zero emissions from 2024 and emissions negative from 2027. Just some clarity first off with the carbon offsetting that's going to be required, and how you intend to do that offsetting and where?
Yeah, really good question. So, as part of the workshops with RCC, we explored different pathways for achieving that. And really, they can be grouped into two categories. One is once we properly account for the emissions that we're producing, we have a baseline. We know exactly how much we have to offset. In the meantime, we've assumed a figure that we know is going to be higher than what it actually is. And two pathways. One is to invest in offsetting schemes. So that might be carbon credit schemes, either nationally or globally. Or the other pathway, and there's lots of different variants to this, is directly investing in initiatives within the region. So that might be planting initiatives, but there's a reasonably long list of possibilities for achieving that. Really, the plan is saying, is this, for the purposes of public consultation, is this something the public sees, thinks we should be doing? And if so, what pathway should we be going down? The plan doesn't get into the detail of exactly how we'd do it. So, if we adopt the plan, then it would kick into another project that figures out exactly what the most optimal way of achieving it would be, and that would feed into the 2024 LTP.
I think that clarity around that offsetting piece is really important. I think, was it just yesterday? Is it Carbon NZ or Carbon Z? I don't know how you pronounce whatever their name is, but having to stop their trading because of some questions around the validity And I think that that's really important if we're sending messages to ratepayers that we're going to be doing something, that there is actually a proven method and a transparent method for actually doing those things. I'm not a huge fan of offshore. I think that that we need to be doing this within New Zealand if this is a particular goal for us.
If I may, through the chair, just to pick up on that point, yeah, this exact conversation came up in one of the workshops, and there was a really clear preference from the participants involved that local initiatives, the direct initiatives within the Waikato region, is absolutely the preferred pathway. And we go as far as saying that in the draft plan as well. So if we did it, this is how we would likely do it, but leaving the policy door open to exactly how we would do it within that context. Yeah.
Right, great. And I note your drive towards electric vehicles. I suppose that just would make the comment that for the second winter in a row, TransPower has been sending messages to electricity distribution networks to shed load because we're not able to meet our current demand. We all know the length of time that in years that it takes to establish new generation. And so we do need to be cognizant of that. I noted your comment about less than 3% of total PT spend was required for that emissions negative piece. Did I hear that correctly transmitted into dollar or defined in dollar terms as going from $71 to $225 per person?
Per capita, yes.
Per person. $71 to $225. Is that a annual?
Annual, correct. Over a 30-year period. Yeah.
Right. I think that just given that we have people, young people in particular, leaving New Zealand, not because they don't love New Zealand, but because they can't afford New Zealand anymore. They're not, the wages are not what other countries can offer. The cost of living is higher, the cost of food, the cost of housing. While I respect that there is a desire to move in this direction, I couldn't support an increase like that given the economic situation that our ratepayers are facing right now. I wish there was another way. I love ambition, but ambition that that makes daily life unaffordable for our ratepayers is not something that I could support.
Thank you. Councillor Teague.
Yes, thanks for your report, Andrew. I think you summed it up really well, having sat through the deliberations on the committee. But in the absence of Chair Angela not being here today, I'd like to move the motion on page 137, and I'd like to reserve my comments until there's been further discussion. Thanks.
Fine. Next is Councillor Vercoe.
Andrew, you're changing the funding mechanism from what it is at the moment through the territorial authorities to a regional rate coming in there. You then say that the rate is going to go from $71 per capita to $225. When are you going to tell the people of South Waikato that their rates that they pay through the territorial authorities at the moment that are probably $10 per capita per year will be increasing to $225 per person in South Waikato per year, and that will pay for the Hamilton bus network and the Tihuia train, by and large the two most expensive parts of your plan?
Yeah, so a couple of things. I should clarify that the figures, the $71 to $225 are gross figures. So that that doesn't land on ratepayers. All of that doesn't land on ratepayers. A significant component will be funded from fare revenue. And if you think one thing about networks and network ridership, we know that higher ridership services, so the metro network, will have a much higher fare box recovery ratio. We see that on our ridership services now. So we would see an increasing share being funded by fare revenue itself. The other significant component will be funded by central government, waka kotahi, and the balance is funded by rates. So if you think about it from a ratepayer's perspective, it doesn't necessarily, but it roughly works out to be a third, or put another way, for every ratepayer dollar that goes into it, another $2 is coming from somewhere else. The second part of your question around, South Waikato, I think a really good question. So the figures in this plan are just averaged over the entire regional population. It doesn't mean that that's how the rating will actually work. If indeed that progresses, that PT Business Improvement Review, in the next stages of that, we'll figure it out, and an input into the next LTP will certainly be a lot of discussion and debate, I would imagine, around how that regional rating model would work and how it's apportioned to different parts of the region. So in principle, where service levels are higher, you would expect that cohort of the population to be paying a higher share of that.
Thank you. Councillor White.
Yeah, thanks very much to Pamela for raising some of the issues that I wanted to raise. But thank you, Andrew. Really appreciate your really comprehensive presentation. Just one comment that I really would like, when we get the documents, to actually have the images and everything in them before we sort of endorse them for consultation. It's really helpful to actually see everything before that, but it's not just you, that's everybody. I guess I am worried about the increases from $71 to $225, and I get what you're saying, that it won't all fall on ratepayers, but I am very conscious of the fact that it's a huge increase. And like Pamela said, I just wonder whether the move to electric vehicles in such a comprehensive way is that the time is right for that at the moment, just with things to do with the grid not being able to meet current demand. So yeah, I guess my question is, you've got current PT expenditure on per capita basis with your comparison of all of the other regions. But do we actually know what the other regions are doing yet? Have we got any of those figures in terms of what their projections are in terms of spending?
So no, we don't have them at hand, but that would be a really interesting question to chase down. So you saw Let's Get Wellington moving in the news regularly. That's really significant increases in public transport expenditure, and it's not about delivering public transport services, it's about unlocking all the benefits that enables in terms of urban form, a whole range of other things, which affects costs in other ways, right? So the way we build urban areas at the moment in particular, we probably couldn't imagine a more expensive way to do it. So it's not like if we don't do this, we avoid a cost. If we don't do this, we realise significant costs, but in other ways, and it falls on different balance sheets.
But there obviously are, you can choose some things over others. For instance, when you're talking about offsetting or whatever. I mean, I guess
Absolutely.
You do have choices around what you decide to do as a strategy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Through the chair, if it's okay, you have a question about the grid and power supply.
Yeah.
So we've been doing quite a bit of work looking into what's required to enable our fleet to transition to zero emission vehicles, including investigating power supply. And one of the things we've found is delivering PT services with zero emission battery electric vehicles is highly complementary to the grid. And the reason for that is our vehicles are out doing their tasks during the day. We charge them overnight when the demand is lowest. And the other really interesting insight is when we have, we're going to need to be looking at depot facilities. And if you think about zero emission vehicles, we need redundancy in terms of power supply to ensure reliability and provision of service the next day. So with that redundancy of supply, there's opportunities to be more complementary to the grid as well. So we will need to store an energy source in some form, potentially hydrogen or battery storage on site. And in times of short power supply, we can put that back into the grid. So highly complementary in a number of different ways.
Thank you.
Can I just ask one other question? So I guess I'm just wondering, so that was quite helpful what you said about the demand lowest at night, etc. But if all of the regions did the same thing that we're doing, has anybody actually worked out what projections there might be in relation to what demands that might create?
I'm not,
and whether that's sustainable?
Yeah, really good question. I'm not aware of a national view of that.
Just before I go on, I was talking to Mercury just last night, and their capacity at Karapiro is going to increase within, I think it's within a year, 18 months. They've been working on a new generation to go in into their power stations at the Karapiro Dam, and it's going to increase the output by 30%. So it gives you an idea, and they're also working on other forms of energy that are going on. So that's interesting. So comments now to Fred.
Yeah, you said this was the cheapest option.
In terms of the regional aspirations or the?
Well, for the ratepayer. As Pamela has been pointing out, the $200 charge, or, approximately $70 if everybody contributes. And you mentioned that this option was potentially the cheaper option, and it is more regionally connected. And I imagine, look, just far reaches Kawhia. If they're going to get a $70 increase in their rates per population, it would be cheaper for them to share and fill up a tank of diesel than to pay that, So you really got to think about affordability and who's going to use it. If we had the option for a hospital run where there's people needed to go and it was coordinated and organised and a van did that, then I'd be very supportive at a subsidy type fare, but across the board, it's, there's things that have just hit me, I'm shaking my head at, which is things we've got to come to accept in living in a green world, because we currently have taken the cheapest option, and that's burning coal and oil, and we're not going to be able to survive. But recycling food scraps is an extra $79 per year per ratepayer just for Raglan. Oh my God, and it just keeps adding up and up. And offsetting carbon into forests, that's not going to amount to beggar all either, because there isn't that much carbon utilised by buses, the amounts of time, compared to traffic. So I don't think we should get too hung up in that, but it's a nice gesture. Again, affordability and really being more strategic in who are these services for and how we can organise it better, because people off the West Coast can't afford that.
Yeah, thanks. I feel like we're getting a bit hung up on what the per capita cost is going to be in 30 years' time, which I think is a bit, if I've understood that right. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's in 30 years.
30 years. 30.
Yeah, absolutely. So in behind this is an enormous amount of work that's particularly happened in the Metro Spatial Plan. So a really significant program in its own right, and it's got detailed costings in terms of network, how networks might evolve over time, and most of the cost associated with PT service delivery is really in that metro area. So delivering rapid PT transport lines. We've got a pretty good view of how that can be phased in over time. And the phasing is governed by provision of infrastructure. Literally some corridors don't exist. So if you think of the Eastern Transport Corridor on the eastern side of Hamilton City, that's not even built yet, so we can't deliver services ahead of that. So when you factor all these things together, it really is a 20 to 30 year development timeframe. And so we can sum up in today's dollars where we think that leads us in 30 years' time, and that's that $225. Yeah. So, adopting or endorsing this plan doesn't mean we're going to jump to $225 per capita tomorrow, but it is signalling to the public that, hey, this is a direction of travel. And there's multiple plan iterations, multiple LTPs, multiple annual plans that will happen in that.
It's very hard to get your head around when we have to forecast a long way out, but if you all remember, the average price of a house in Hamilton was 150,000 30 years ago. And the incomes were sort of, it's very difficult to get your head around what things are worth in 30 years' time. So we shouldn't get hung up, as Councillor said. So that's just my comment. Yep, sure. Have you finished, Stu?
Well, let him clarify, then I'll finish.
Per person per year, correct.
Yeah, but it's not
on average.
Not all from rates though. Well, there's NZTA stuff going, but the other point I was going to make is that look how much Wellington currently spends now compared to what we spend, and think about the conversation we had half an hour ago about better cycling infrastructure and stuff like that. I want to commend. Look, I haven't been involved in this process, but I want to commend you and your team on the work, and Angela and Carl, on the work you've done on this. I think you've done a good job. So I'm really supportive of where we're heading. And if we don't make this aspirational, I shudder to think what sort of mess Cobham Drive's going to be in when I try and go home at night. It's bad enough at the moment, Just one little point of clarification. I just clicked on that little thing there, and it took me to a Waikato People's Panel. Is it supposed to do that? Or because I assumed it would take me to the submission form, but
Wendy Voa can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think it's live yet. So if you adopt the plan for public consultation, it'll go live. If you don't, we'll do something different. Yeah.
And I think I'm in support, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Have we got to move in a second? Okay. Andrew.
Good PowerPoint. So the $71 plays the 225. What sort of dollars are those?
$2022.
Nominal dollars.
Yeah.
So what does it look like in terms of real dollars?
So all of these figures are expressed in the value of the dollar today. So we haven't assumed.
Hang on, you've sat here and listened to my colleagues contemplate on $225 in 30 years' time. You didn't put them up. It's not the right way of thinking about it. If they're not inflation adjusted. So my question is whether it's nominal or real. That's the first question. The second question is a group of us, 4 of us, actually met with the chair of the Climate Change Commission some time ago. His exact words were, "We won't plant ourselves out of trouble." So I took from that we will have a rational approach to afforestation. So my next question, I guess, is someone, I think it was Councillor Burko said, or it might have been Councillor Lichbach said, a good gesture, because I think that's all it is. So what tree are we going to plant and where? Because if it's pines, we don't want them in the King Country, thank you very much. I'll tell you why. Because if I don't want to be a part of a council that's signing up to a program that's going to be planting trees that's putting our sheep and beef farmers in your and my area in jeopardy. So here's the thing. If he comes to us and says we're going to plant trees and there's going to be offsets, then he needs to be ready for these questions because I'm giving you some very strong feedback. It's pine trees. We don't want them in the King Country. Because yesterday, 4 of our senior staff sat in a conversation with the beef sector and this subject came up. And it's fair to characterise the atmosphere in that room as very nervous about where pine trees are going to be planted. So, I think I'm sending you a message about what impact will this have on our sheep and beef industry. So if we're going to be planting trees, just think about the collateral implications. Final comment, you said that these buses can store power and then we'll be able to pull it back out of the grid. So I've been doing a lot of research on this subject recently because I'm thinking of buying an electric car. There's only one vehicle you can buy that will allow you to put solar power or any power into it and then pull it back to power your house. That's if you want to power a house. That's called an F-150 Lightning. You can't get them in New Zealand. None of the other people that are providing these electric cars allow that sort of functionality yet. What you've described is the holy grail. If we can put power into those buses, park those buses up overnight and then suck the power out of them, that's pretty impressive. So do you think we're there? Have we got that technology now?
Councillor, I think this would be useful. Could the CEO make a comment, please?
Look, I think my new vehicle, which is a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle, I understand you can put the power both ways as well.
What sort of vehicle is it?
Mitsubishi Outlander.
You'll be buying one then.
Through the chair, I'm happy to pick up on those points that have been raised. Yeah. So a couple of things. So dollars, real or nominal. So I'm just repeating the things I think I need to cover. The dollar figures, planting, pine. What's the assumptions in behind the work that's been done to date, and then the grid question. Those are the three. Yes. Okay. Brilliant.
Thank you.
All right. So in terms of dollars, there's certainly no intention to mislead anyone. So these dollars, it gets quite complex, right? And it's already quite reasonably complex. So I genuinely didn't want to confuse anyone by escalating costs over time, because then I'd have to communicate that as well. But we can do that work. So all of the dollars you see here are dollars expressed as in the current value of that dollar today. So that obviously over time, we're going to get escalation on that, but that will play through in these figures as well. Planting. So the work that we've done has assumed if we went down the track of planting to offset, first and foremost, it's not the notion. The notion of we can't plant our way out of trouble. 100% agree with that, and that's something we've picked up on as well. So first and foremost, it's about reducing the emissions that we're producing. So in terms of how we deliver PT services, that's wrapped up in terms of the zero emission vehicles and doing things in relation to that to really drive down the emissions we're producing directly. But also, the second part of that is creating networks and service levels strong enough to attract people out of cars, which offers further emission reduction potential from broader transport. In terms of, I should clarify two things. One is when I was talking about integration with the grid, there's two aspects of it. So one is integrating a reserve energy supply that's not situated on buses. So if we had in association with the depot facility, so whether that's battery storage or storing energy in the form of hydrogen that can be converted to electricity, or whatever the solution is, that's on site, that's on depot, that's not on bus. That's a redundancy. So if we have disruptions to the grid, we can still power our vehicles and deliver services the next day. So that absolutely can be integrated into a grid. It was just this week, I was talking with suppliers that are setting up similar sort of depots in Australia at the moment, actually, and looking to have a presence in New Zealand, and they're very confident about that. And they were also very confident about the ability to integrate battery storage on buses as well. I'm less convinced that that's a useful thing, but they were very convinced that it's technically possible.
So what I'm picking up is just a general view that there's been a lot of homework done and a lot of effort being put in here, which speaks to Councillor Kneebone's comment and to Councillor Nicol. We need to move along. Andrew, you've still got your light on there. Have you got right? Councillor Teague.
Yes, thanks. Look, just responding to some of the comments. First of all, I agree with Pamela that I'd be less keen on offsetting overseas. It should be local. But there's always the option of planting in natives, which goes to Andrew's point.
So there was one question I didn't cover off. So all of the work we've assumed is planting in natives and planting on marginal land. So steep hill slopes, that type of thing.
So the other comment I heard was, we had some issues with power shortages, and this would be a problem if we, transition to EVs. The Climate Action Committee, I think last year, had a presentation from one of the chief executives of Transpower, and he made it very plain this is not a problem. And in fact, there's enough already consented renewable energy that hasn't been put into operation already to cover the projected use of EVs out for the next few decades. There will need to be more investment, but he's not seeing it as an issue. And in fact, the failure or the near failure we had recently wasn't due to a failure of renewable power, it was due to a failure of gas-powered, fossil fuel infrastructure. In terms of inflation, New Zealand, in fact, is one of the lowest rates of inflation in the OECD. I'm not quite sure about the argument that people are leaving because the cost of living is lower elsewhere. And in terms of this whole issue around the cost, bear in mind this is still going to be a targeted rate, am I correct? So that if you received a service, you would be rated for it. If you had a much lesser service, you wouldn't be rated for it. Am I correct?
That's the working assumption for the PT Business Improvement Review, but Council will make a decision on that in due course. Yeah.
Sure. But assuming that targeted approach continues, then, and to Fred's point around what would be the cost of regional services, the costings that were done for the Hauraki district, which was quite a robust service, like a daily service connecting towns within that district, the annual cost per ratepayer was $45. That's annual, not weekly or monthly. That was the annual cost. So it wasn't that expensive.
Okay.
The other point I'd make is this plan has to go out for public consultation. So I think it's a bit. We're getting ahead of ourselves if we think we can assume what the public want. And I use the example of what's just happened in Auckland, where they've proposed like a climate rate, which will include public transport. It went out for public consultation. I think the weekly cost was around $10 or $12 a week, and the overall majority of people who submitted were in favour of being, having that impost on them. But we can't assume necessarily that people don't want these.
What the response might be. Fair comment. Is that all?
Yeah. So that's it.
Thank you. Councillor Husband.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. I just picked up a couple of points. What Mac was saying is, Councillor McPherson was saying is quite right. And I know it's not your responsibility, but it is a concern. Our farms are getting whipped up with people offsetting carbon, so and communities are getting destroyed, so it's a bloody good point going forward, and I do understand that's not your role. New Zealanders are piling out of New Zealand. The latest stats were out this morning on the thing. It's quite concerning because of the cost of living. So, and it's young people, not old people like me. It's young people piling out, the people that we need to keep. So, when I hear things like this, I feel like I've wasted 9 years of my life. I really do. I just $225 per capita, and we actually sitting around here think that's okay. So per household, that's another $1,000 on their rates for someone in Tokoroa, or someone in Tihaui, or someone in Tauhei, or someone in all the other places that aren't on your four legs of your little
Councillor, it's actually 1/3 of that amount.
Well, even if it's a tenth, yeah, in 30 years, it's going to add up to a lot of money. And I just don't. And we're saying, I'm sorry, I've been around a little longer than that, Mr. Chair, like yourself. I've seen Tauhei pump. I've seen Muggeridge's pump. I've seen all of these things that we thought we'd do for $20 or $70, but it's ended up costing a fortune, and yeah, everything. And so I get really nervous and concerned that we're not breathing. I know for a fact we don't have the support of the mayors in South Waikato and Matamata-Piako. Happy to show the text. I'm concerned. I'm really, really concerned that we've just taken this away, or we've just convinced the territorials or whatever we've done to rate for regional transport, and then bammo, we're going to come in with this hammer. So I just think it's a no-brainer to vote against this.
Councillor Nicol, final comment, please. Yeah, and then Councillor White. you can wrap it, just make it quick.
I'll be quick. A lot of young people are going overseas to places with great public transport, just going to say. The costs, I said there were a few things I would have changed about the plan, but I didn't come to the right meeting to say it. And the inclusion of this in particular, these costs, was one of them, because obviously it can lead to some confusion. And I think it's incredibly difficult to predict what will happen in the future around our community's desire for public transport. If we had to meet some of the emission targets, it'll have to increase by even more than what that might be, potentially, or it might be less, because we have other crazy things happen, like the COVID pandemic, that we couldn't have imagined sitting here now. And so, but one thing I know very well from the emissions work and the climate work, and that is that cities must lead in the public transport space. That's where the majority of the transport emissions are. And so I'm feeling really, really confident about the fact that Hamilton will need a plan like this to help send the message out of the direction that we're going. So thank you again for your work.
Thank you. Right, Kathy, final.
Just following on from something that Stu said, and that was just, have we actually tested this with the TAs? Like, have we actually asked them what they think about the aspirations, the methodology, and, whether they think that there is going to be greater uptake of this as a result of this kind of work? Because I did it yesterday. Okay, so because
no answer from my. Sorry, please have my answer from the person.
I'd really like to know.
Yes, an appropriate question. We have an answer from staff, please.
So yeah, three components to that. One is there's been representation from district councils via the RCC, so input from elected members through those channels. We have started stakeholder visits, testing these exact things. That's the purpose of a public consultation process. So we've visited some councils through the, if the plan is adopted today, our aim is to get round every territorial authority and any other stakeholder that wants to see us as well. But we've certainly got most councils lined up in diaries already.
So what we're talking about, councillors, is we establish a scenario which is based on the best homework that they can do, and then they put that out for consultation. So you're going to be meeting again to consider all that feedback and are we on the right page. And as you've heard from another councillor, sometimes the feedback you get is quite different from what you might expect. So I'm just saying we are going to a consultation phase. We're not bearing something where it's not able to be manipulated or changed. So, yeah. Well, they have through the committees, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Through the workshop and committees to date, through some of the visits that have happened to date. Yeah. So Waipa earlier this week, South Waikato and others. And yeah, a range of feedback. So the Waipa, for example, yesterday, I believe, we were very, very positive about all aspects of it. But that's going to vary by district and location.
I'd like to, we could talk on this for a long time. I think there's been a good discussion and I think there's been great feedback given and the concerns that have been given as well. So what I'm really interested in is how those concerns will emanate from the consultation. And, I'm really looking forward to seeing what we get back. So I have a mover and a seconder, I understand. So I'll put the motion, Dennis, I'll override because where we're at. So I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please raise their right arm because there might be a few people against, please. This is for consultation, so we'll just have staff record it. So you've got 4, 5, 6. 07. Yep. Yeah, Nicole, Hugh Verco, and Stu Kneebone. That's 1, 2, and Fred Litchwell. All of that stuff. And against, please. 2, 3. 2, 3. Okay. Is that everybody in the room? It's carried, declare it carried 7-3. Thank you for the discussion, and I've no doubt division's recorded. I've no doubt the discussion is going to be taken on board, and we'll be certainly considering those items when you come back. But thank you for all that work that you've done. Thank you. Now, we've got to a couple of other things happening, some in public and then some in public excluded. So I'm looking forward to councillors getting through this work, because I think it's important we have the councillors around the table for the valuable discussion that we've had so far and continue that going forward. Thank you for the rest of the meeting. So we now have, yes, that's why I'll crank it along, because we do want your inputs in all these quite important matters. So with that in mind, I'll make sure people have a speaking right and stick to the point. Greg, we're now on page 206.
Happy to move, Mr. Chair.
Mover and a seconder, Councillor Husband, Councillor Verco. Any questions of staff?
I'd just like to start by, this is a complete no-brainer. Anyone who's been here this whole triennium
I agree.
Understands that Muggeridge has got the funding, didn't get the funding, don't need to go through it.
Agree.
Let's just put it through.
Right.
So this is just a killer project.
I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Right? Aye. Against? Carried. Got to be quicker than that.
Did you say?
I'm moving it along.
Against?
You could be against. Yes, you could record it against.
You want to keep the project going? No.
Right. Yeah. But you record it against if you wish.
No.
Are you happy? Right, not recorded against. Okay, we now move to the amendment to the council resolution. This is integrated catchment. The amendment to the council resolution with respect to Natural Heritage Fund.
Have it a second.
Kneebone and Husband. Any discussion?
It's just rewriting the wrong
It's all just good. Fred, do you want to talk to this one?
No, I just want.
We'll get the light. We'll allow him to speak.
I'm not
first.
giving him the light.
You're not going to give him a light. Okay.
Look, I'll regurgitate what I've said again. Apologies to council, but communities, when it comes to value for dollar and the work that they do, I don't think it's being acknowledged sufficiently by this council in not topping that account up, keeping that account topped up, so we can continue to support all those other groups that are missing out on doing this work.
Message heard.
Thank you.
So thank you, councillor. I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, carried. So we now move to Waikato Wellbeing Project, and Karen's going to join us.
Thank you, Chair. Afternoon, councillors. Actually, you'll recall Harvey Brooks, Executive Director of the Waikato Wellbeing Project, here to update you on the progress made in the 2 years since Waikato Regional Council and Well Energy Trust entered into a partnership to establish a backbone organisation to support Waikato communities to work toward achieving a defined set of wellbeing targets. So, Harvey, I'm going to hand over you to provide a brief presentation on progress to date, but also to share some of the thinking you're doing looking forward to the future for local government. I'll give you this one.
I've got it. Thank you, Karen. Kia ora, Mr. Chairman and councillors, and thank you very, very much for the opportunity to be here. I've got a bit of a presentation, and I don't want to drag you through that too slowly, so I'll move with reasonable pace, but please just hold me up if there's anything you'd like to discuss, and I've got a bit of paper to hand around to you.
How many slides roughly?
I think around about 15, I think was the number.
Well, we'll be cranking through those.
Yes.
Carry on.
Yes. So I will move with pace and stop me if you want to. Now,
Right.
have you got your finger on the mouse? Lovely.
We've got the control.
Yes, that's right. He can just go to the end if he gets bored. So look, you're probably familiar with the purpose of the project. I won't dwell on that. It hasn't changed at all in the 3 years or so that the project has been around, and it's on the wall there, so we can go to the next slide. Just to reinforce the attributes of it, this is a community-led project with a global alignment through the Sustainable Development Goals. One of the key attributes that we've tried to focus on is it being bottom-up and around building connections. This is not a top-down strategy policy-led initiative, and it's about supporting communities and leveraging their resources. And the two words at the bottom there are really the most important in terms of what we're trying to do. We're trying to facilitate insight into the root causes of our wellbeing challenges as a region, and then facilitate breakthrough for those. However small and slight that breakthrough might be, but breakthrough nonetheless. Next slide. How we work, basically 3 components. There's the Waikato Wellbeing Project team, which is me and one other, and then a series of contractors supporting us through project teams. A Kaitiaki Advisory Board, which is a group of 9 individuals selected through an open process, co-chaired by Mike Rolton from Vinnie's and Delwyn Abraham, who was selected through a process facilitated by Waikato Tainui on behalf of Waikato Māori. And then Manutaki, who are our outcome leaders, if you like, for each of our Sustainable Development Goals. And those are people in and of the community who are the voice of wellbeing, and people like Jen here is one of those. And then they connect with communities. Next slide. Now, I'll just quickly hand this out. Karen, if you can hand them this way, and Jen, if I can give you one of these and hand them on. Councillors, you won't be able to read this on the screen, which is why I'm giving it to you in hard copy, but this is our 1-page business plan. And so I will just quickly start to take you through that now. It starts with our vision, which I've already told you. Our kaupapa as our Sustainable Development Goals on the left-hand side. Our targets are the colourful boxes along the bottom, which haven't changed since the project was launched by the Prime Minister 2 years ago. And then what I want to focus on in a second is the right-hand slide. So if I can have the next slide, please. So as has always been the case, we have aligned the project with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Now, we aren't religiously connected to those. They are a practical way of thinking about different divisions of the environment and wellbeing. The great thing for us is that it's a globally recognised framework, and it's a common language for action. As you can see in the diagram, it's divided into 3 divisions: environment, communities and economy, with the central pole of partnerships for the goals. And so the partnership that we have with the Waikato Regional Council is absolutely essential in that regard, and I do thank you for that partnership. Next slide, thank you. So this is really at the heart of the work that we've been doing, because if you're trying to achieve wellbeing, of course, we don't achieve it on our own, but what is it that we can do? So these are our priorities for the next 18 months to 2 years, and I just want to take you through those. So in terms of impact, the things that we actually do, there are 4 of those. First one is called Potoko. It's around leading, facilitating and funding some impact projects. The second page you've got here goes into a little bit more detail. You can read that at your leisure. We have identified a few key areas to focus on, such as youth, food and poverty, climate action, ecological restoration and housing as the areas where we'll take a bit more of a deep dive. Our second focus is on what we've called their pūriko, or sharing wellbeing stories through data and insights and knowledge. And I'm sure that you are all acutely aware that there's no lack of data on wellbeing, but actually getting knowledge out of it and knowing how we're going on wellbeing is a bit more of a trickier question. So we're currently developing with the Regional Council a business case for what we're calling the Waikato Wellbeing Knowledge Centre of Excellence, but basically a one-stop portal for understanding wellbeing knowledge across the region. I'll come back to that soon. Third one, Haukainga, celebrating local stories. My perspective, councillors, is that we don't need to invent solutions to wellbeing. They exist. There's thousands of them. There's tens of thousands of them just in this region. What we need to do is find them and profile them and share them. And you're all involved with those as members of your community. But so often They are undiscovered and unsupported and untold. So we can tell those stories. And the fourth one is waha, using our voice to advocate for positive change. So having found out all these amazing things and understood well-being and what could make a difference, how do we use our voice along with others such as the Regional Council to advocate for change? The lower bar there, effectiveness, is how we work as an organisation to do that. So there's just 5 areas, 4 or 5. First one is supporting my board to function effectively as a board. The second one is joining resources for key competency areas. We can't do this on our own. We need partners. The third one there, whakawhanaunga, is around having the relationships and the support and funding to endure. At the moment, we are a limited time project in terms of the funders that we have. We would like to endure and continue. The fourth one there, mana, partnering with Waikato Māori around shared opportunities, recognising that iwi and Māori have very, very clear strategies on wellbeing, and we need to do our thing to support those as well as coming up with our own ideas. A key point for this council, the po on this diagram, we've simply called Waikato, and it's about supporting the Waikato plan and the Waikato spatial plan or spatial strategy that will come from that. The Waikato Wellbeing Project doesn't write strategy, it doesn't do planning, but we as a region need it. We need to know what the future looks like. So we're looking to this council to work with us. We'll work with you on that partnership. Next slide. You can think of us as a social impact lab. There's an author called Zaid Hassan. His book is there. You can pick it up on Amazon. What is a social impact lab? Well, social meaning solutions through a social and bottom-up process, impact initiatives that make a real difference, and laboratory, a place where evidence and insight and prototyping and experimentation is encouraged. We're not a silver bullet shop. We're not trying to come up with one-shot wonders, and we're not pretending we're always going to be right. What does he say these labs do? Well, to quote him, they bring together a diverse, committed team and take an experimental prototyping-based approach to addressing challenges systematically, that is at root cause level, and keep going. That's it. So that is in effect the purpose of the Waikato Wellbeing Project. Next slide. I will actually move quickly through this, but just to give you an example, when we look at the Herald headlines such as this, police shocked at youth caught in failing shopping centre burglary. Now, it's easy to be outraged and sort of get angry about what causes the youth to do this and get on one's ZB and have a bit of a rave. But what we're really interested in is what's the root cause of that? What's actually causing this to occur? And we can think of this as something which some people call a complex or a wicked challenge, because the root cause for it is not immediately evident. The language wicked is a bit distracting. It's not morally bad. It's wicked in that it's incredibly difficult to understand. It's the difference between throwing a rock into a pond and throwing a live goose into a pond and trying to predict what's going to happen. So we're interested in these complex challenges, such as that one there. Next slide, please. With the time I've got, I won't actually dwell on these because they're just basically analogies of complexity. But we're trying, as I said, we're trying to get to root cause, and I can come back to those, Mr. Chairman, if I need to. Next slide, please. So we're all about insight and breakthrough. And the test I have for any investment that we make, any partner that we have, is are you really interested in root cause? And are you really interested in doing something different? And that's the case. Yet we're absolutely keen to partner with you. Next slide. So two areas I'll just give a quick example of. The first project that we've been working on for more than a year now is the Rangatahi opportunity, trying to understand what really drives well-being for our 15 to 24-year-olds in the Waikato region. What does well-being look like at the moment statistically and in terms of their lived experience, and what are they actually looking forward towards in terms of well-being for the future. Now, there's lots of youth projects around the region in every community and right at a regional level as well. What we've tried to do is bring the approach that I've mentioned to you to the project. So we're not just writing policy or something like that, but we've also made this a project that is led by youth. So the first thing we did was actually recruit 3 youth innovators, and we said, it's your project. You tell us, we'll guide you with the technique if you like. We'll give you the guardrails, but it's up to you to decide how we actually go about this project and the approach we have. So we've put youth in charge of a youth project, and from what we can find out, that's not very common. Next slide, please. So our vision there is probably not an unusually phrased vision. You might read that in any policy statement or plan about youth, but that's one. The key point there is it's mana enhancing. and supporting youth to define the positive pathway they want to have many life options. Our target, when I first came into the project, the target here was the percentage of youth not in education, employment or training. And when I thought about that for a second, I thought that's a pretty negative target actually. That's actually defining success by what's not happening. So let's flip that around, because actually this number would have changed a little bit because of COVID, but in 2019, 87%, more than 87% of our youth were in education, employment or training. That sounds all right, doesn't it? What we want to do is get that up to a much higher level. So we're trying to actually be careful about our language here as well, as it's about mana enhancement and positivity, not about deficit and problems. Next slide. So in the time that I've got, I can't take you right through the project, but this is sort of a summary of our approach. As I said, rangatahi-led, very much rangatahi-centric in terms of the principles involved. We've decided in the first case to focus on kirikiriroa, and the reason for that is simply the statistics around this is where at least 40% of rangatahi on the Waikato are located, so we'd start here. We've used a design thinking framework, which is in the white banner across the centre of the diagram, working collectively and trying to understand systems changes. So we've collated a huge amount of data from Waikato University. We've interviewed about 35 or 40 rangatahi from across the city to understand in their words what wellbeing is like. And through that, we empathise and understand their lived experience and their journeys. From there, we are now at the stage where we're starting to work with groups of youth to design what potential solutions to some of these challenges might be. So we're not running away with the data and some old geezer like me sitting in a room trying to boil it up. We're actually asking youth, what do you think the solutions will be? And then we'll be working towards a case for change in August, September, October, where we will present that to a range of youth organisations, whether they be at the local, regional or national level, where we'll say, here are some new innovations, who wants to help us to actually prototype and trial these? So that's the process. Next slide. We're now also starting what we're calling the Waikato Kai Challenge. I don't need to explain to anyone in this room the challenges around food and food affordability at this time. An extraordinary insight I heard actually from Ngāti Hawa recently was if you look at where kai comes from for most whānau, about 75% of families are able to go to the supermarket and actually get a decent feed from the supermarket. They can afford good food, fresh food and veggies, decent meat, that kind of thing. About 5% of people do go to food banks and charities because they simply cannot actually afford food. And then not in the middle, but in the middle between those two is about 20% of families who can go to a supermarket. They are actually employed, but they can't buy good food. So they're going and buying pre-boiled sausages, white bread, fizzy drinks, biscuits, that kind of thing, because it's the only way they can get full from the supermarket. That's actually where our challenge lies right now, is how can we change the system in order to actually focus more on those people who do want to actually feed their families well. Everyone wants to, but at the moment the system is failing for them. So we've just started that project. Next slide. The Wellbeing Knowledge Centre of Excellence, which is a terrible mouthful, and we will find a much better phrase for it, Mr. Chairman, as we work through this, and we're working through this with the council right now. As I said, if I said to you right now, go and find how we're doing on wellbeing online, well, I'll come back in a month and maybe you would have managed to figure that out to some degree. So from the point of view of Waikato citizens, we need to make this a lot easier. So we're building what we think will be an easily accessed digital one-stop shop for wellbeing data in the Waikato region using dashboards. We want it to be a trusted source of knowledge and a relevant resource where data is as live and up to date as possible, measuring progress over time. So on the next slide, I think I've showed this to you before, but I'll just give you an example from the work that we've done on housing. This is actually a live online digital housing dashboard we developed with the Waikato Housing Initiative. We developed this for about 18 indicators of housing quality, quantity, and location across the Waikato region. This shows you the indicator. This is static. I can't play with this online on the screen for dwelling mould based on data from the 2018 census. And it's focused on the Waikato district. So it tells you from census data, for example, that in the Waikato district, about 16,000 people live in mouldy houses. About 20,000 people in the Waikato district are under the age of 20. And then if you look at the ribbon down below, which is a bit hard from my distance to read it, around about 11,000 people live in houses with a small amount of mould, and around about 4,000 people in that district live in a house with a large amount of mould. And you can click on every one of those coloured areas, which are SA2, statistical area units from census, and it will tell you exactly how many people are living in those areas with mouldy homes. And we've done that for 18 indicators. Now, what we want to do is actually do that for every wellbeing indicator in every part of the region, and do it as soon as we can. Next slide, please. So that just brings me on to strategic context. And this is something that you as a council would have been talking about extensively. So I'm coming into this less informed than you are, but with a real interest in it, because we're all here about wellbeing, or whatever we want to call it. Next slide, please. So the context there, won't read it out because you're very, very familiar with all the things that are going on. I would just say, as an outsider looking in terms of local government, it's not just about government-led and legislative change. It's an opportunity, I think, for the Waikato to improve its wellbeing ecosystem, to create better impact and better value for everybody. Next slide, please. I thought, what is the Waikato wellbeing ecosystem? If you try to draw it, what do you get? So this is a rather rough attempt, but the dark circles in the middle are various sectors who have a role in wellbeing. Yourself, the Regional Council, philanthropics, community organisations, business, iwi Māori, local authorities, central government. And then there's a whole range of organisations, basically sort of the principal of reasonable scale wellbeing organisations in the region. And I'm sure everyone of you can tell me at least a dozen that I've missed. The point is, it's a very complex system. And if we think about local governance reform by just focusing on local authorities, the 11 coloured wheels, plus the regional council, I almost feel like we've missed something. There's actually so much outside local government, or outside the immediate core of local government, that has so much to do with well-being. So if we're going to think about how we improve well-being in the Waikato or any region in New Zealand, it's not just about rearranging the pieces around local government. Actually, it's about the whole system and how well the whole system works. Next slide, please. So I see three opportunity scales over time. The first is the next 6 months, which coincides with local government elections and decisions that you and your successors will make about committees, projects of the council. And I think there's an opportunity for us to have a conversation about the arrangements between the Waikato Wellbeing Project and the Waikato Plan, especially the project aspects of it. And I'll explain that in a little bit more detail in just a moment. Over the next 2 years, I think there's an opportunity, given that complex ecosystem, for us to think about how we better coordinate and gain value from various Waikato wellbeing entities, because there's lots of them, and you're a funder of lots of them. And then over the next 5 years, I think through the broader governance reform, depending on that happens, I think we can look at how we contribute to a national social innovation network. So I'll just quickly, Mr. Chairman, say a few words on each of those and then I'll be done. Next slide, please. So the Wellbeing Project and the Waikato Plan, and I must say that I think the Waikato Plan does amazing work. It really does. I'm really a big supporter of it. But if we think about it, the words, the Waikato Plan, it's more a project these days than it is a plan. It's much more project focused on doing things. My expectation, and again, you'll know more than me, is that the strategy and plan aspects of the Waikato Plan, the plan itself, will probably be replaced by the regional spatial strategy that is anticipated through the reform of the Resource Management Act. The reality at the moment is, at a project level, there's been a convergence of the Waikato Plan and the Wellbeing Project over the last year. And that's in terms of operating models. So the Waikato Plan also now talks about incubation hubs, systems focus, seeking insights, social impact lab, just like the Wellbeing Project. And also in terms of priority areas, there's a focus. Both initiatives need funding and support. They both operate relatively lean, and often they involve the same people. So out there in the community, there's a bit of confusion about who does what. The Wellbeing Project has a partnership and funding agreement between this council and the Well Energy Trust, and the relationship and the coordination of the project and the Waikato Plan are central to that. The councillors, I think there's an opportunity over the next few months to talk about how we better integrate these two projects together. Next slide. Beyond just us and these various other wellbeing entities, there's lots of organisations doing great work, and they all contribute towards wellbeing. As I said, they're often the same funders, the councils, government, philanthropics. And each time someone creates a new entity, additional operating costs get incurred. A new chief executive, a new marketing department, a new data person, a new iwi relationships person, and so on. So there's real risk of duplication here, both in terms of outputs and services and also in terms of back office support and overheads. So the question that I'm laying on the table, I think, for consideration is not just are our local government organisations set up for purpose into the future, but are our various wellbeing entities around the region also well set up? And can we get more value out of those by doing things differently? I'm not suggesting crashing them all together into one super entity. I'm just saying, can we get more value? So I think options could include further integration, perhaps co-location and hubbing, sharing of back office functions, etc. But I think a few of us need to put up our hands and actually say, yeah, we're up for that. We're actually up for doing these things a little bit differently. Next slide. Just the last one, at a more national scale, and how we bring innovation into local governance reform. So questions on my mind: how do we embed locally driven innovation, design and delivery into the local governance system? How do we build a system that acknowledges complexity, emergence and uncertainty, that reflects real world experiences and recognises that all parts of the system vertically and horizontally are interconnected? How do we develop a solutions-based approach unique to Aotearoa New Zealand in the 2020s and beyond? So next slide is a bit of a suggestion that I've made to a few people across this region and also to the Future of Local Government panel. There are sort of social impact labs in almost every part of New Zealand operating in various ways, but not operating in a coordinated, integrated fashion. Maybe what we could do is facilitate a network of those labs across Aotearoa that really start to address some of these big challenges that we have. Could they be a core part of the new structure of local government aligned to the new units? Could that further enhance collaboration between local and national government? Could each of these have their own distinct and aligned areas of expertise and complex social, environmental, economic and cultural challenges? And can we build on existing models? You might have heard of the Southern Initiative in Auckland, where they have something called the Auckland Co-Design Lab, which is, if you like, a protected function co-funded by local and national government, which does these things. And is there a link here to CoLab? Because when I look at how CoLab's evolving, even its word, CoLab, says that they are moving into this space as well. So I think there's an opportunity to think about how we bring this all together.
Harvey, the
I'm
last
done.
slide, because we're, yeah.
Yep. So last slide,
Mr.
Chairman.
Yep.
Here we are.
Thank you.
Happy to answer your questions.
So there's some really big questions laid here, and we could talk for an hour.
That's right.
Easily. So what I'd like to do is, I know I've got a couple of councillors, or 3 councillors have got their lights on. If you can raise just matters that relate to us rather than the bigger issues, and keep them succinct, that feedback to Harvey, I'd really appreciate that. So first one up, Stu Husband.
Oh man, you've just slashed 25 minutes off my
Yes, exactly.
Thanks, Harvey. Yeah, awesome. Again, it's a shame you weren't here earlier. We were talking about high-level stuff. And to me, this is great high-level stuff, aspirational high-level stuff that we talk about. How do we actually get it down there? And that's the age-old problem. So, and how do we report that back to council? How do, and I'm guessing you've got processes to be able to do that with things. But the root cause, for me, I've just got 2 things, Mr. Chair. I'll be really quick. The root cause for me, and it's just a thing, is we're letting developments go on with no infrastructure. And that comes from an old screw prison officer. Like, we've got all these developments going on in the Waikato with no infrastructure for the kids. Yes. Guess what kids do when they have nothing to do? Get into mischief. So, and I said that 10 months ago or 11 months ago. I said I saw all those kids handcuffed when I drove through Pocono. All those kids had the cops standing over them and they're all handcuffed. That's what kids do. They've got no infrastructure, no footy grounds, no skateboard parks, no things.
Thanks
So,
for that.
right, okay, one more thing. I don't think on your slide, when it's to do with kids and kai and shelter, you should have with emphasis on Māori and Pacifica. I don't think you should have that on your slide. I really don't. I don't think that any child that's starving is important. Whether they're Pākehā, Asian, doesn't matter. Any child that's starving is important. And I think that's offensive to have that on there.
Point made.
Yeah.
Thank you, councillor. Very good.
Anything else
Councillor
is fine,
Hodge?
anything else is fine, but
Yeah.
just that one about Guy.
Councillor
about
Hodge,
kids.
make it quick.
Kia ora, Harvey. Mine is very quick. I think you should take your paper to Tairanga Whenua. I do believe your Māori words, some of them are not correctly spelt. We have fought for many years to get our words spelt properly. You're missing a whole lot of macrons, and there are words here that you are separated. So I really think you should take your paperwork to Tairanga Whenua to get your Māori words sorted.
Thank you for that. Councillor Litchfield.
Now, I'm going to invoke standing orders in 5 minutes.
Well, I'm the chair, I can override it.
I know that. I'm just playing. Yeah, look, I've listened to Te Waka. I've now listened to this. I've listened to, all of these things that are supposed to be working with communities and bottom up. And look, I'm going to be a little bit critical. And when this was first raised, I said we want to get out there and get this information. For example, the Tamariki, Huntly, Ngarawahia, where there is real potential to get good information. Hamilton, living in the city, if you can afford to, it's a whole different thing. The kids are not the same. Although, we've got to commend we aren't getting ram raided and things, and 30% of them are going to school. Okay. The point is that when we attempted to do bottom-up work with this council, as in community restoration and working with communities to create employment opportunities, to improve their catchments, to work with city and rural people to improve all of those things. And as proven again in Whaingaroa, crime rate went down where we lost a policeman, How can we reinvent what we squashed as a council that meant so much to communities, reinvented? Because by doing this, you're stimulating youth employment, pride in place, economic gains, improvement to biodiversity, water quality, and bringing rural and urban together. I want to do it again, and I want to see it bottom up. Thank you.
Thank you. If you've got a brief, I'm pressed for time. There's one item that we must get through before 3 o'clock. And if I have to, I will actually adjourn this meeting and we'll go to PECs and then come back. So just be aware, councillors, I want to move quickly. Thank you.
Very, very quick. I noticed your comment about mouldy homes.
Yes.
And there was a Habitat for Humanity report came out yesterday, which said maybe 42% of households are worried about dampness. The best thing we can do in that area is our Sustainable Homes Eco Retrofit program. And I know Karen is, and others in the local government sector are trying to convince the minister to give us an exemption. If you haven't already done so, could I ask you and your networks to lobby the minister in that direction? Thank you.
Thank you, councillor.
Thank you.
Councillor White.
Just a very quick comment, and that is just, I really like what you said about achieving good outcomes in the wicked problems, because we do have some really wicked problems. I guess my concern is just that quite often we spend a lot of time and money on the bits that are slightly easier, like the developer, gathering the data and producing the dashboards and things like that. But actually we often end up falling a little bit short on the implementation of things that'll achieve on the ground outcomes. And so what I'd really like us to focus on is to make sure we don't become top heavy on the data collection and the dashboards, but that we focus on how we get those on the ground outcomes. And I know that that's possibly not what your role is. Part of your role is gathering the data, etc. But I'm just conscious of the fact that what we really need is to see those kids who have no shoes and don't have the shelter and live in mouldy homes, etc. We just really need to get some runs on the board for those situations.
Thanks, Councillor White. Councillor McPherson, just a quick comment, please.
I think you're making outstanding progress. Well done. It's a shame you've got to boil the ocean, but you've done a good job of it, and I like your synthesis. I'm a supporter of what you're trying to achieve. If there's anything else you need, and don't be shy about putting your hand up. Well done.
Thank you.
Thank you, Harvey. And so what you're picking up is some intense interest and feedback. I'm not asking you to necessarily reply to all those things, but I think that we can feedback councillors through our staff and through to Harvey, and Harvey also back through. So we'll keep that channel open. So with that, if you're happy, councillors, I'd like to move to resolution, which is on the screen. Yes, it is just to receive. So Councillor McPherson, seconded by Councillor Kneebone. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, carried. Thank you, Harvey.
Thank you.
Sorry about having to move it along, but we've got a couple of items.
Thank you very much.
So we're going to move to public excluded immediately. I want to avoid the procedural ones and go to two items which I'm hopeful. I really want to ensure that two councillors have to leave at 3 o'clock sharp. I would want them to speak first on the item that I'm going to bring up, which is on page 18 of the PECs. But we are now going to move to resolution to exclude the public. Do you want to cover that off just in general? Moved by Councillor Litchworth, seconded by Councillor Nicol. And the reasons are up on the screen. So all those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, carried. Right, we're just taking 10 seconds to change out of our